PTSD related story to you. And I know these stories can be sad, but they need to serve as a foundation of where we need to go. We need to use these stories, our experiences. You heard me talking about the OODA loop from time to time. This is where we need to go as a society. We are observing right now. We are observing that we have veterans and people, law enforcement officers, fire, EMS. We have people that grew up in bad neighborhoods, that people that had things happen in their lives that were beyond their control that have traumatized them. And here, Army's Captain America dies by suicide after nearly a dozen combat tours. And there's a young Captain America, obviously, as is remember when he was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And this reads, decorated veteran suicide puts spotlight on epidemic plaguing America's veteran. You know what really pisses me off about that is somebody writing, I don't know who's writing this, but they're like, oh, this puts the spotlight on PTSD, on the epidemic plaguing America's veterans. Yes, it does. And why does it put the spotlight on? The spotlight should have been already on it. Going back, we know as a society, going back, World War I, Soldier's Heart, World War II, shell shock, Vietnam, the 1,000-yard stare, and on and on and on. And we know that PTSD is true. We know it exists, even though some of us, including me at one point in time, thought, just a way you just look at things differently. No. PTSD, while others may come home missing limbs, unfortunately, or traumatized with physical injuries and stuff, PTSD is an injury of the mind, and we don't treat it well. It's difficult to find places that treat it well. And everybody should know that there are places in the United States that they check all the boxes for being a PTSD treatment center, and they are scumbags looking for money. And their whole goal is to separate PTSD victims from their money or from the insurance company's money and not really do much for them. They get them to meditate, do little things, but they really don't do and dig the work. If you really want to get PTSD help, go check out Post-Trauma Soul Recovery or go check out deerhollow.com up in Utah. Both of those places are great for helping people get along. Now, they say 20 combat veterans take their lives each day in America. Jennifer Griffin reports on how the White House is trying to help. Well, I hope the White House is trying to help. And let's think about modern times, right? We started combat in 2001 for the global war on terror. It's 2020, and we're still in combat. And while we don't have a lot of forces, big divisions heading over like we had in Iraq, we have people like Master Sergeant Andy Christian, Marcus Sano, because they're in special operations, repeatedly going overseas. Now, I don't know how the military treats it today, but I do know back in my experience with the military, when people would go, when people who went to combat were, they had the opportunity to go see a psychologist, psychiatrist, something along those lines. Some were told, hey, remember all your fellow soldiers, sailor airmen, and Marines, they want to be there. They want to be in combat, so don't go whining to this shrink. That was from the 90s. And while I feel that culture may not be the same today, it's still there. And maybe it's not the same where people tell us to go see stuff. Here's the help available. If they really want to focus on helping people, we have to understand that and help people understand that PTSD is recoverable, that PTSD is an injury, post-traumatic stress injury that comes out of Dr. Amy Crawford out of Post-Trauma Soul Recovery, and who runs the therapy segment at Deer Hollow Recovery up in Utah, where I went to for 6 weeks to work on my stuff. The article says, the enemy can never break him, but what this decorated Green Beret eventually found was that his enemy was within. Friends who served with him in the military say he was the real Captain America, and I have no doubt that he was. And so are so many others. Look at that smile. That smile of Captain America. And the shine in his eyes. I've managed that smile a time or two. A lot more than that. We get good at putting it on us when behind those eyes there is a war going on in our brain just to try to understand what is going on in our brain. Article goes on to say, Master Sergeant Andrew Christian Marcasano served 6 full tours in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division and the Ranger Regiment, and a half a dozen more combat tours overseas. He rose to become a decorated Green Beret and Silver Star recipient. He had just moved to Washington, D.C. to start a coveted job at the Pentagon 2 days after the 4th of July. On Monday night, after having dinner with his former battalion leader, Marcasano returned home from dinner in Old Town Alexandria and died by suicide in front of his wife. He had 3 small children and was still on active duty. Now, PTSD, it is up to the person to ask for help. And when you have a Silver Star recipient, one of the highest decorations for valor. And let's understand what a decoration for valor is. When you get the V device in the Army for valor, that's something you earned in combat. It wasn't something you did. You see Bronze Stars running around, people with Bronze Star plates, and hey, good on them. But some of those Bronze Star plates, many, or I don't know the percentage on their license plates, some of those were for administrative duties because it was in a combat zone, so they get a Bronze Star. Others were Bronze Stars with V devices, and those are people, women and men, who received their award for actions that they took in combat. And usually when you receive a Silver Star, it's not for actions taken in combat where you were combating, I don't know, nothing. It's for actions in combat where combat was really bad. And that Silver Star denotes that whoever that person is that got that award did some really crazy shit and lived often. Sometimes they die posthumously awarded. Not Andy. Received it in person because he survived some crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. Unless you've been shot at, blown up, while you can empathize and all that, takes on a whole new meaning. And this man, this hero, went back time and time and time again. Now, one of the problems with PTSD, I know from my personal experience, is I kept loving to go overseas because home, PTSD functions well in a war zone. Everything about PTSD, it's my fight or flight syndrome, or it's not syndrome, my fight or flight mind coming up and saying, hey, we're in a dangerous situation. Do what I say and I will do everything I can to keep you alive. And over time, you realize that, hey, that thing works. Doesn't work so well here in the States. So people go back overseas. They go and they go and they go. And they go because they're loyal. They go because they care and they believe in the mission. They believe in the people they serve with. They believe in helping those who are under them and over them. But all of that, all those honorable things results in a whopping case of PTSD for many people. The article goes on to say his death sent shockwaves through the military. His friends, family, and military leaders were at a loss. Many told Fox News that Marcasano never got over his tour in Afghanistan's Agrahab, I can't pronounce it, Valley in 2009 with the 2nd of the 508th, a battalion that had one of the highest casualty rates of any unit during the war. The deployment was like being in the ring with Mike Tyson for a year, according to the battalion's, there he is, former Command Sergeant Major Burt Puckett. What's up, Puck? Burt was one of my early and influential leaders when I was a private. I believe he was a sergeant first class or maybe a staff sergeant at the time. He sent a passionate appeal this week to the rest of the battalion. Text me. I told you before, my door is open. My phone is at hand. We did things that people make movies about, and in some cases, writers and producers wouldn't even try to write our story. The rucksack is heavy, and when it gets heavy, we should help each other. But you have to reach out. Don't let the Valley win. Don't let the wars win. It's hard. And I'll tell you, people say, why do people with PTSD kill themselves? Well, I can only speak for myself. And obviously, since I am here, because if I wasn't here and I was dead, then you'd be having a problem if you're watching me. But why do people kill themselves with PTSD? I don't know. I know my answer was or is sometimes the noise in your head just doesn't stop. Because let's think what PTSD does. PTSD comes about from the trauma we experience, and it comes about from the fear we have, and it comes about because we get so used to looking for bad things because there's so many bad things in a war zone trying to kill us. And as a leader, not only do you have to worry about that individual there trying to kill you, but you have to worry about the men and women under your command, the men and women to your right and left. You have to worry about accomplishing the mission. There's a great book I talk about a lot in my survival stuff, the preparedness role, called the Mission and Me, the Mission, the Men and Me by Pete Blaber. And what it is leadership technique. The first thing that comes, the first consideration is the mission. We have to make the mission is happening because of a reason. We have to make the mission successful. Then comes the men, the people I'm working with. I have to take care of their working for me, with me, around me. I have to if I can take care of everyone else, and likewise, they kind of have the same mindset, I get taken care of. And then at the end, I worry about myself. I guarantee you here, Andy spent a lot of time really stressing out how to keep his people alive. And when you go into a bad tour in places like where he was, you lose people. People come home forever changed. And as a leader, a lot of times that sticks with you because those changes, remember the mission, the men, and me. The mission comes first and the men come second. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the man to make the mission happen. And that sacrifice isn't a check mark on a page or something that you put in an operations order or expected casualties at the end of a mission. No. That sacrifice is someone you had breakfast with that morning and you've seen the pictures of their families. So when we think about this, for those of you who haven't been cursed with the realities of warfare, and here in the States right now, we hear people talking about civil war. Some people, I think, are clamoring for it. I don't wish that on our nation. I don't wish that on the people. And what I really don't wish that on is the children who would experience that, because ask any of these soldiers. They saw it over in Iraq and Afghanistan. They saw the children, innocent children, caught up in the middle of it. The last thing we would need and we would want, and you can talk about freedoms and this and that, is to have a war split us apart. And you know who that affects? It affects our children forever. It affects their children's children. For all of you watching this, think about people in your lives that you know that in some form or fashion, maybe they had PTSD, maybe they're older people, maybe they've had some rough lives and they have some anger issues, the way they do about things, and think about that, how that has affected you. Because one thing with PTSD, while we all suffer, PTSD person taking that way out, we can call that the easy way. But really, who gets left holding the bag of our PTSD, whether we live or we die, is the people that are around us that have to suffer with us and can't help us. The people who we take our frustrations out on. That's the problem with PTSD, the big problem. Back to the article. Sergeant Major Puckett, Command Sergeant Major Puckett, he sent a passionate appeal this week. All right, read that part. Marcasano's suicide was the 30th from his battalion. He is, and a battalion's about 600 men. I don't know how many were in this battalion, but usually give or take 600. He is one of the 20 combat veterans taking their lives each day, an epidemic the military and White House are trying to stop. Last month, President Trump launched the Prevents Task Force with a White House ceremony. Article goes on to say, my administration is marshaling every resource to stop the crisis of veteran suicides and protect our nation's most trusted heroes. They've been through so much, and it's such a deep-seated problem, Trump said. Well, hey, I am not the biggest President Trump fan in the world. I'm not a fan of a lot of politicians. I hold them to a high regard, and as such, I am very critical of them. And what is true is that we need to stop these suicides. We need to protect our most treasured resources, our heroes, and we're not doing that. And how are we not doing that? This bleeds over into something I want to speak about Afghanistan. Recently in the news, it came out that the Russian government is paying Taliban bounties to kill Americans. And that went crazy. Oh my God. President Trump, did you know about this? Well, first of all, let's start by, because most of the people I talked to who were overseas, or a lot of people, I don't say most, but a lot of people I talked to are not shocked. Nobody seemed to get upset when it was well known that Iran was supplying tons of munitions to kill thousands of Americans. Everybody got upset when Trump killed Soleimani, General Soleimani, back in December. And no one was really concerned with the fact then that he was killing Americans. The Russians did it to us in Vietnam. We did it to them in Afghanistan. Whether you offer a bounty on a head or you provide the resources for them to kill a person, either way, it is facilitating the death of a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guard person. And Russia, should we be surprised? We all try to act like somehow Russia is our ally. Since when the fuck was Russia our ally? Russia is our enemy. Now, it may be a Cold War. It may be a micro, little, tiny flame that's lighting that war. But Russia, China, while we get along with them on some tangent, they're still our enemy. They remind me of lawyers going into a courtroom. There's the prosecution and the defense, and in there they go back and forth, and outside there they go have drinks and talk about cases and how you doing, Joe. We've been at war for 20 years, almost 20 years in the GWAT. We have military, contractors, Department of State, government people, all kinds of people around the world in war zones. And you know what we don't do very well? We don't deal with PTSD. We don't give them the tools. Because here's what I know about PTSD, that there are tools that we can use to make ourselves, to help heal ourselves. And maybe we will always bear the battle scars in our minds of things we've been through. But it's those tools that will help us to deal with those scars, to help us heal those wounds. And when we're having the bad days, like I've had a lot of, like we all have, especially people that are in the grips of PTSD, it's those tools that help us deal with it and deal with it better. And I will tell you right now, y'all can go do the research it. My feeling, and talking with a lot of people I know that work in some very special units in the military and elsewhere, we do not do much for PTSD. Because here's the deal with PTSD, folks. PTSD is a wound of the mind, and it's something that we can work, that we can strive, that we can do better at working on ourselves. We just need the education. The military is good at teaching us how to kill people. The military is good at teaching us how to polish our boot. Well, they don't even polish boots anymore, but dress right, and get stuff straight. They do a shitty job of teaching us in advance of how to deal with the demons we will have in our brain, because we do the things they ask us to do. Not only do we do them, but we run to the sound of the guns. That's what the military does. They run to the sound of the guns. The police run to the crime. The firefighters run into the World Trade Center. And we don't take advantage of the opportunity before the injuries to their brains happen to do anything about that. I said in other videos, why aren't we teaching this stuff in school? Everybody that goes through school, we all know that people are shamed, they're bullied, they're kicked, they're whatever. We all have, most of us, I don't say we all, but most of us, many of us have it happen to us when we're in school. I was bullied and I probably came across as a bully at times. I was shamed and I probably shamed others. We all do it. It's part of the human condition. We're all assholes at points. Well, if we teach the kids in the schools how to deal with that, not by going out to the park after school like I was taught when I was a kid, go out there and settle it with fists, because nowadays people just don't use fists. They pull out knives and guns and then they all kinds of other stuff. And if we teach the kids young, we teach them a lot of stupid shit in school. Why don't we teach people how to sort life out as it comes? Imagine if we had in America right now that in the middle of this epidemic or pandemic, whatever the hell we want to call it, imagine if we had America right now where most people were able to let the stuff that we see out of the media go. Let the stuff that we see that the viralness of Facebook go. Maybe we'd find more common ground, because when we argue with one another, we're in our fight or flight. When we're stressed out and we start arguing, that goes to our emotional side, fight or flight. And when we go to fight or flight, probably not the best time to rationalize in the middle, because our brain thinks it's at war, it thinks we're in danger, it's fearful. That's what PTSD is. We're afraid. Deep down in our brains trying to protect us. Maybe if we started having those conversations and we started making it so people had those conversations, maybe before people went into the military, the first 3 months of basic training, before they actually touched a gun, before they learned to march, while they were still innocent people, relatively. We teach them how to work with their brain, and not some route thing that the military does where they say, this is the task, conditions, and standards of this exercise, of this training we are going to do. Our task is to train you how to kill the enemy. The conditions we have are you giving one M4 rifle, a bandolier of ammunition, and a field full of enemy. Your standard is going to be measured by how many you kill and how effectively you do it. How about we say, hey, the task is teach you how to manage your own mind, to deal with and overcome the problems of the mind that we are going to inflict on you by sending you to these places. So that way we have people like Master Sergeant Andy Christian Marcansano to not take their life in front of their wife. Just imagine how she goes now. She, seeing the man that she loved end his life in front of her. She has PTSD now, probably, or will, maybe some point down the road. Definitely going to struggle. I'm throwing my PTSD shit on her. Shouldn't do that, but that's a struggle. And she has to raise her kids. Keep going on. Staff Sergeant Alan Thomas served in the same battalion as Marcansano. He died by suicide in 2013, leaving behind 2 daughters and his wife, Danica, who was at the White House ceremony in June to launch the president's suicide prevention initiative with the Independence Fund and the Department of Veteran Affairs. Be a hero for a hero. To sponsor retreats for units like the 2nd of the 508 to reconnect and keep fighting for the buddy on their right and left. Now, here's a problem I have. We need to support one another. And what I know is that sometimes when I hang out with my friends who have, likewise, most of them do have PTSD, whether they've been diagnosed, whether they admit it or not, most have PTSD. I can see it in them. When I hang out with them, my PTSD gets going because what do? We go back into that bond we had back 2007, 2001, wherever you were when you were in war with your friends and your buddies and your teammates. That's what we go back to. And that gets our fight or flight in our way. It can get our PTSD going. What we need as veterans, what we need as contractors, as State Department officials, as people who have worked for the agency, government people who have gone overseas into harm's way on behalf of our government, what we all need is for our government, for the people who send us to war, to take the personal responsibility to care for the people after. Oh, the VA is working on a project. I'm sorry, VA, you can gargle my balls, because here's the problem with the VA, and it's not any of the recent problem. How is it just now that the VA is coming up working on some new preventative initiative for PTSD when the VA's been around long before these wars? They were around. They knew what PTSD, and sure, maybe they didn't grasp it the way we do grasp it nowadays, but there are people out there. There are resources. There are things they can do, but you know what the problem we have with the federal government and things like the VA? It's a bureaucracy, man. It's a bureaucracy. And while there are people in there that are very, very, very well-intended, getting anything done in the government is often difficult. When I was working for the Department of State, working in diplomatic security as a medic, I was asked to be on a board to help come up with a small, we called them blowout kits, IFAC, individual first aid kits, a little kit that an agent protecting a diplomat could wear on them. Because these agents, while they walk into these protection scenarios looking like they're wearing a suit and everything's good, maybe a little earpiece in, they are armored up and kitted up. Under those coats are guns and handcuffs and whatever the hell they carry on their Batman belt. And what a lot of people gave up, especially when you have women agents that have tiny waists, there's only so much real estate you can put on that belt. So where do they put their guns, their ammo, their radio, everything they need to make their mission happen during the day? So what often they lose out on is the first aid kit. That goes. So I was on a panel. It's a good thing to have. Hey, these men and women are carrying guns, protecting diplomats. They should all have some sort of tourniquet and pressure dressing and all that, stuff like that. Well, that panel I was on for 11 months. It grew from 5 people to probably 30 people. And when I left that assignment after 11 months on that panel, I left my assignment and left the panel behind. They still hadn't gotten any closer. We had meetings monthly. Maybe they sorted out. I don't know. But it shouldn't take 11 months to figure out how to get a first aid kit that works. Likewise, it shouldn't be 2020 and now the VA is like, oh, let's try this thing. If you really want to fix it, get the people together who are really, really doing it in society. The Amy Crawfords of the world. Get them together and find out a way to implement this across our society and as part of the regular and ongoing training for police departments, fire departments, EMS, and the military. Because that's where we save people, not after the fact. We're trying to put a Band-Aid on a damn arterial bleed after the fact. Let's get in front of this. So people, when they go in and they go into these situations, they come out and they say, hey, we just had this really bad experience up in this valley in Afghanistan, and I'm having trouble. But the military doesn't want to do that, because when the person says they're having trouble, guess what they have to do? If they're being honest and if they're doing what they really should do, what being a conscientious human means is pull this person off the line and let them get some help. Now, there's certain units, certain agencies that do that. By and large, it creates a hole because you don't have a replacement waiting there a lot of times. And those men and women don't want to be pulled off the line because they feel that they're leaving their friends hanging. When I worked for Blackwater, I gave up R&R after R&R and after R&R. Because we were short medics and I didn't want to leave my teammates without a medic. I'm paying the price for it now with my PTSD. Had I had the experience ahead of time, maybe I could have sorted some of that on my own and known what I needed. That's what we need to do. Article goes on to say, there is also a 24/7 Veterans Crisis Line, 1-800-273-8255. Again, I will say that again, 1-800-273-8255. The VA now has a same-day access for emergency health care. Under the Trump administration, veterans have a right to seek private sector care at the VA's expense. And the VA can't provide timely care directly to that veteran. And I'll tell you what, in speaking with people, and there's the number again if you want to see it, in speaking with people that are currently working through this with the VA and such, I'm going to show you something. I don't take these because I meditate, I do my stuff. And hey, and like I said in my other videos, I smoke weed. It's after 4:20 here. So tonight, when I wind down, when I sit down to read and sit out in the sun and relax with my dog and try to unwind for my day, that's what makes me better. This is what they try to get me to get. Some of those have been there for months. It's what I know to be true is, yes, medications serve their purpose. They definitely help get you over the hump when you're real bad. And unfortunately, we have a system now that says, oh, we'll just keep medicating you rather than treating you. When you medicate people with PTSD and then you use that as the sole form of treatment, it's similar to putting a bandage on a person who has an amputation, saying, hey, you'll be fine. Just keep sucking up and rebandaging that wound. It does nothing. It does nothing. Because the problem with PTSD, the PTSD issue is there are memories, there are things in our mind that are buried way deep that our subconscious pulls on, triggers on. And medications just make it fuzzy. They don't deal with the problem. Dealing with the problem takes education and experience and time. Thomas was a 3-time combat touring infantryman with 82nd Airborne. A suicide bomber detonated and ripped through his body. He recovered from severe polytrauma, multiple trauma, like a lot of trauma, a lot of shit from a suicide bomber. Makes sense. After months at Walter Reed, but struggled with PTSD. He was medically retired, but he missed the military mission. According to Danica, who said he felt useless in civilian life. In September 2013, he asked his young wife to take him to the Fayetteville VA emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation. There were no beds, so the VA sent him home with a prescription for painkillers. Something that would not happen today, given the new procedures. There wasn't a bed. Staff Sergeant Alan Thomas, his wife Danica, and their two. Days later, the last words Alan said to me were, "I love you." I heard the gun cock, then he went out the door, and I heard the door shut on us. Just like the VA had shut the door on him, Danica Thomas wrote of her husband's mental breakdown that night in 2013. Eyewitnesses said that Alan's last words were, "I got it. I cleared the house." We think at the time Alan thought he was back in Afghanistan, because when you say it's cleared, hey, room clear, I'm clear, you're clear, we're all clear, different stuff. You're clearing the house. You're making sure that there's no bad guys in there. He cleared the house. And why he might have thought he was in Afghanistan, article goes on. But in body, Alan was in our residential neighborhood in Fayetteville. He thought he was taking out the enemy, but instead, I haven't read this article. It was two innocent neighbors and their dog. Ann Alt, 68, and her husband Todd were killed that night. Alan, a 2-time Purple Heart recipient, then turned the gun on himself. They didn't have a bed available. Got plenty of cots to go overseas. Plenty of cots. Go overseas. Hey, if you don't have a cot, go there, lay on the floor. And most soldiers would be fine with that. Didn't have a bed. Go home. Take painkillers. Take pills. They don't work. They get you through the rough spots. They get you over the hump. You need to work on your brain. We need to understand what is going on in our head. Why is it going on in the thought processes that happen? Meds help. They don't. They are not a solution. Article goes on to say, we believe he came back to the here and now and realized what happened. Then he fell to his knees and turned the gun on himself. I heard the crack of the gunshot from across the neighborhood. His wife, Danica, wrote, he did everything right. He wasn't too proud to ask for help. And he asked for it. But the VA was too broken to provide it. And because of that, 3 lives were lost just days after he asked for help. That is the problem we have, folks. The VA cannot handle this. We are ignoring it because it's not an obvious wound, and we only deal with the wound when we see it, when something like Staff Sergeant Thomas, when an incident where he kills his neighbors comes up. Weeks later, the VA called to offer Thomas his medical appointment. I buried my American hero with a baby on each hip, Danica Thomas said. Young combat veterans die by suicide at 4 times the rate of other veterans. Representative Susie Lee, Democrat of Nevada, and Jack Bergman, Republican of Michigan, introduced a bipartisan bill this week to launch the Zero Suicide Initiative at the Department of Veterans Affairs to improve veteran care and suicide prevention, with the ultimate goal of bringing veteran deaths by suicide to zero. An unexpected outgrowth of the COVID-19 epidemic is that the mental health resources for former combat troops, active duty troops, and their families have been a casualty of quarantine, and repeat combat tours have led seasoned troops to say the forces still being deployed to Afghanistan are out of gas. Look at that right there. Sergeant Thomas. Master Sergeant Andy Christian Marcasano. Look at that smile. Forever gone. Forever gone. We need to do better. Bye for now.